Good morning. I am very pleased to join you for today's virtual event, Inclusive Quality Education for All. We have a truly global audience with registered participations from every region, which is wonderful to see. At the outset, I'd like to express my deep appreciation to the permanent missions to the United Nations that are co-sponsoring this morning's event. We greatly value your commitment and support. I would also like to thank the civil society organizations that have provided support for the organization of today's event and for the work you do every day to improve the quality of people's lives. We are 2 years into the global COVID-19 pandemic. While there are hopeful signs that we are turning a corner, the pandemic has had a profound impact on our lives in so many ways. We have lost loved ones, we have experienced a global economic crisis, and we have seen years of progress in education that have been erased. More than 90% of students worldwide have been impacted in some way by temporary school closures. Students with autism have often been especially hard hit. Many do not have the access to opportunities for virtual learning, and they have been affected more than others by disruptions to routines, as well as services and support that they rely on. Perhaps the most worrying is that the inequalities in access to education, and even more so to inclusive education that existed before the pandemic, have been further exacerbated. Those who have been most marginalized face even larger obstacles in this regard than before. This is one of the many reasons why the 17 Sustainable Development Goals adopted by world leaders in 2015 have taken on even greater importance than before. The goals provide a shared blueprint for addressing the major challenges we face, including inequality in all its forms. Goal number 4 on quality education is especially relevant here, as it aims to ensure equal access to all levels of education and vocational training for persons with disabilities and building education facilities that provide inclusive learning environments for all. In this respect, the goals echo the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which recognizes that persons with disabilities have the right to inclusive, quality education on an equal basis with others. It is undeniable that we still have a long way to go, but if we all work together, we can make significant progress on these fronts over the coming decade. Tremendous work is already being done all over the world, including by many of the people that we will hear from today. They will, I hope, provide a global snapshot of where we stand and where we need to go, and I know they will inspire creative ideas that will help us achieve a world that is truly inclusive of all neurodivergent people. Thank you.
Hello from Maryland in the United States. I'm Jean Weingartner, a self-advocate and parent of autistic children. I serve on the board of Partnership for Extraordinary Minds, a nonprofit dedicated to improving the experiences of autistic students, and I'm an employee of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. True inclusivity is so important in education, but it is so difficult to find. In my work, I hear story after story about schools putting autistic students in segregated or not truly inclusive classes with equitable work. In my own experience, I've been told that if my child wants to take honors or an unusual elective, that there will be no support offered. When one of my kids chose to take Spanish in a self-contained class because there were fewer students and more personal attention, we were assured that the curriculum would be the same. But it wasn't. He wasn't allowed to move to the next level Spanish the next year because he wasn't being taught at the same depth as the students in general education. Segregated classrooms limit the potential of autistic students. When I ask other parents about their experiences, they tell me the same stories of exclusion, school refusal to believe in what their children can do, and busy work in segregated classrooms. They and their kids constantly hear the message that they are not capable or worth the effort. Schools seem to think that if you need support, if you are non-speaking, or if you need an unusual accommodation, you cannot be in an inclusive class. This is absolutely untrue and damaging to both disabled and typical students. The only way we can create a unified, inclusive society is to start with unified, inclusive classrooms where all kinds of differences are embraced. Students who need support and accommodations can absolutely be served in a truly inclusive environment, but it takes training, effort, resources, a willingness to presume competence, and a deep belief in the value of these students.
My name is Deirdre Kempen, and I'm the owner and principal of Shalanti Private School, an inclusive teaching school. Our school caters for neurodiverse children, children with learning difficulties, concentration difficulties, and even gifted learners. Now, in South Africa, you have 24,000 government schools that caters for approximately 12.5 million children. And in South Africa, you will always also find 2,000 independent schools that caters for 400,000 learners. In our circuit, we have 249 schools. These schools are served by one psychologist and one social worker. Their duties are to go and for support, screening, training, home visits, and parent support. These are often one-time visits only. Some of our government schools are well funded because of school fees and because of where they're located, and they can afford additional support, like class assistants, smaller classes, social workers. Whereas in your less affluent areas, you find very under-resourced schools. In South Africa, we don't have a specific school for children on the spectrum. Those were all closed down, and our government then took an inclusive teaching approach. Now, in our more affluent areas, that works well, where government schools can have smaller classes with more resources and equipment, where in your less resourced schools, inclusive teaching is not possible because those classes can go up to 60 learners in a class. As a school, we dedicate ourselves to change the stigma of autistic learners. We also go out to schools to train those teachers when we mainstream one of our learners to one of our neighboring schools. And we make sure that the teachers understand the specific profile of the child and what the child might need. In addition to that, we ensure that the child is ready for a more neurotypical environment. Because in South Africa, unfortunately, the world out there is less forgiving than what it is in here.
I'm Deepthi Ganesh Kakirala from India. I have mild to moderate autism. My highest qualification is Bachelor in Computer Applications. I wish to share about my educational journey with you all. In school, I had behavioral issues as I was sensitive to noise and touch. Often my classmates would laugh at me. I would get upset and walk out of the class. My teachers did not know how to handle me. They often called my mother and asked her to take me home. My mother decided to quit her job and help me to cope with the school environment. She met my teachers to explain to them about my autism spectrum disorders and how to handle my behaviors. Since then, the school and my teachers became supportive. I excelled well in my school and completed the schooling successfully. In degree college, I opted for Bachelor in Computer Applications, mainly because I was interested in computers right from childhood, and also my mother was a computer professional. I did well in my computer subjects, but degree maths was tough for me, as I have taken the concession of lower maths in school. I worked hard, and with my mother's help, I was able to bridge the gap between lower maths and complex degree maths. During COVID times, my final semester exams that were supposed to be held in March 2020 were postponed indefinitely due to lockdown. 1 month before, I came to know that my final semester exams that my examination pattern would change completely from descriptive to objective type. It was difficult for me to prepare for the new pattern in a short time. With my mother's guidance and constant support, I did well in my final semester exams. Today, I'm proud to be a graduate in computer applications, and I'm proud to be an employee of a multinational company.
Namaste. I'm Swati Vellan from Ishanya India Foundation, Bangalore, India. The Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 provides a clear statutory backing to inclusive education. But the situation of people with autism in higher education is deplorable with their invisible numbers. I think the biggest challenge is the dearth of accurate data in articulating the number of people with autism in entering and attending higher education. Although awareness on autism is improving, there's lack of clarity on what is inclusion. There's gaps in the implementation of policy, and a big set of population live in rural India with limited access to resources and services. While we do have good policies in place, from RTE to RPWD Act to Equal Opportunity Cells in universities and the new Education Policy 2020, we do not have enough statistical reports about the number of people with autism in higher education, in spite of having a 3% reservation for students with disabilities in every educational institution. But I think we were making some progress in the enrollment rate, but the pandemic and the school closure definitely led to an increase in the dropout. The pandemic stimulated innovation in the education sector and technology trying to fill in some of the gaps. And thanks to National Institute of Open Schooling, a lot more people with disabilities completed their basic education. But I think we still have a long way to go in implementing inclusive education, in training more teachers, in creating awareness, and most importantly, focusing on the system adapting to their needs rather than fitting them to the mainstream. I think there's an immediate need to fill the gap with well trained professionals, including special educators and school counselors, who are the driving force of inclusive education. Although many autistic people in India do not have access to higher education, I think many organizations are working together in skilling them and, of course, working with companies to show the case of neurodiversity being a competitive advantage.
Hello, I'm Sarah from Namai Center, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I work with children with autism spectrum disorder, and despite the great progresses in services provided to these children, enrolling and succeeding in basic education remains a real challenge for them and their families. We look forward to a future that guarantees them the right to enroll in a basic education that gives them real learning and development opportunities.
Hi, I'm Oliver, an occupational therapist. I work at Silver Bells Early Childhood Intervention Program in Kigali, Rwanda. Talking about the education of the autistic community, children with autism are many times more likely to be excluded from the learning places and schools. And this alone has created a huge implications in the lives of their families, making it so difficult or challenging for them to get the resources needed for their kids' learning, as well as meeting the cost for learning. When we talk of inclusion, bit of it for these children with autism, because they are capable to compete with other children in classes. There are a lot of things that need to be considered. First of all, we need to look at giving specific trainings to teachers to work with these children in order to meet their needs at their different levels. And for their needs to be made, there is also need to develop a curriculum specifically for them. And also, as we develop curriculum to meet their needs, we should also look at how can we transition these children from the learning environment into the society, because we see that these children are capable of competing and learning like other children. This has been evidenced at my workplace at Silver Bells, where we have been able to integrate some children whose parents had lost hope, Whereas the schools where they have been, they were saying they were not able, but at least with this inclusive bit of it, trained teachers, professionals working with them, they're able to gain skills and they're able to be reintegrated into the mainstream. There is huge hope for them to gain skills academically, the social aspect of it, and in other areas. Thank you.
As an autistic individual who has been blessed with many unique and wonderful opportunities, I feel it is my duty to speak about an issue that is quite concerning and is extremely important to our civilizations. This is the role that autistics play in our own lives, in our own homes, in our own communities, in our own schools. Sadly, all too often, that role is one of being passengers, not drivers in our own lives. What I am calling for here is more than awareness. I call for inclusion. Inclusion in decisions that are made on our behalf in so many different settings. Inclusion in laws that are made. Inclusion in treatments and supports we receive in our homes, schools, and communities. We want to say, we want our autonomy to be honored and respected. We want to be seen as people, not as disorders or a series of deficits that need to be addressed. I have the privilege of being an autistic who has worked as a teacher and works now as a behavior analyst. I am striving to change the way my fields that I dearly love, treat my people. We need to be seen first as people and afforded the respect that comes with that. We must be included. If an organization or association says they provide services for autistics or for people with special needs, there must be representation in that organization and not token representation. There must be consideration for our voices and experiences. It is a reflection of a civilization's ethical and moral foundation, how the people with disabilities and special needs are treated. Autistics are human. We are members of our communities and schools. We are here. Just because our neurotype makes our voices harder to hear does not mean we should be excluded. So yes, please be aware of us, but include us as well.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Claire Barnett, and I'm quite excited to be moderating this panel on inclusive education for UN World Autism Day. I am a visiting fellow at Vanderbilt's Frisch Center for Autism and Innovation. I'm a full-time MBA student at UNC Chapel Hill and am an autistic self-advocate, also have ADHD, and am a service animal handler. So I'm excited to bring that perspective to leading this conversation among some really exciting panelists. And I'd love to introduce those to you now. So first up, we've got another self-advocate, Lauren Melissa Elzy, who is an instructional support specialist and who I've had the privilege of working with before. So I'm very excited to bring her voice in here. Next up, we've got Diana Ringe Crow. Have I said that right, Diana? Perfect. And she is the head of Lego collaboration and social ventures for the Lego Foundation. After that, we've got Archie Apollo David Jr., who is the executive director of the Academia Progresiva de Manila and the Independent Living Learning Center. So we'll get to hear about his experience in the Philippines. And finally, Gerardo, who is the CEO of Iluminos por el Autismo. Have I said that correctly? Close enough. Perfect. All right. So this group has some expertise from around the world that we are thrilled to combine in a conversation about what the future of inclusive education looks like and where we're coming from in terms of education for students on the autism spectrum. So I'd really like to start with the self-advocate perspective here. And I mentioned that I'm autistic, so is Lauren Melissa. So I think, Lauren, both of us are coming from this place of knowing personally what it looks like to experience education as an autistic student. And I want to hear more about your personal story and what it was like from when you started school to the highest degree you've achieved. And I know this could probably be, an hour-long tale of the joys and the challenges. But when you think about the key things that you want people to know about your educational experience, and perhaps also share when you received your diagnosis, because I think that's helpful context here.
Definitely. So I was not diagnosed at a young age. I was late diagnosed at age 23. And that is for a variety of reasons, many of which have to do with my education story. But I want to just position first and foremost because I am a woman. And at the time that I was in school, and even today, most people don't consider that autism can affect women and girls, much less a Black multiracial girl. So, as a undiagnosed autistic girl, I navigated friendships, family, and school with this constant question lingering in my mind. Am I broken? I was constantly thinking that something was wrong with me. But even though I had a lot of strengths, I had passions, I still have many of those passions, and I performed well academically for my teachers. My social struggles were often swept under the rug with meets expectations. So, underneath that surface, I was being bullied by my peers for stimming at school. I had nonstop migraines from fluorescent lighting, from sensory overload, from social overload. And at times I missed over half the school year. And I was even docked a time or two for over participating in class, which made my peers laugh at me publicly. So it was pretty rough. And by the time I hit my teenage years, I internalized that my social struggles, my special interests, my stemming needs all pointed to this inherent brokenness in me. But I never gave up searching for a community that I couldn't find at school. And I finally got my answer when I was diagnosed at age 23. And I learned that I was different, but not less. So today I see, and back then too, some amazing educators who have realized that a huge struggle for autistic students is not that we need to learn how to be like non-autistic people, that we need to treat all students with dignity and respect, that we can learn to accept differences and value unique strengths. And for those who are undiagnosed at any time, we need those things at all times. And I'm sure many of my peers and colleagues here have a lot of thoughts on universal design, so I'll save that for later.
Wow. Lauren, Melissa, hearing you tell your story, which I've heard before, remains powerful because it speaks to a reality of miss or under diagnosis in certain populations in particular. And I'm certain that's something we're going to come back to as we continue this conversation. But as someone else who also received a diagnosis relatively late, I was in my second year of undergraduate at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was 19 years old. And so to go through most of the traditional education system without knowing what was different, it's not a unique experience, which is really disappointing. And I think that's something I would love for educators to keep in mind is you may have students in your classroom who, even if like you or I, don't struggle academically, they're seeing some social challenges, some sensory challenges, and maybe some certain learning challenges, even if they're not, failing overall in classes, that even if they don't come in with a label, there might be a way that you can be perceptive and say, perhaps you're on the spectrum, and maybe not, right? Maybe it's another learning disability, maybe it's something else challenging, but stay aware, you may have undiagnosed students in your spaces. And Lauren, Melissa, I want to do one follow-up with you here because I want to know what it's like in your job as an educational support specialist, working specifically with the autistic population and advising on this topic. What have you mostly taken away from your experience to your job? And specifically, what within your job have you learned about students that aren't as much like you or I, but are just the same on the autism spectrum and have unique learning needs?
That's a big one. What have I learned about autistic learners as an instructional support specialist? And I think that one thing, if I have to choose, that I'll bring into this space is there's a trend where schools talk about looking at autistic students as people first, and then the disability second. And yeah, of course, we need to see autistic people as people. We are people, like, hi. And we are people with a neurological difference, a neurodevelopmental disability. But I don't want to be seen as a person first and then an autistic person second. I don't I don't see myself in that way. I would like to be seen as an autistic person at the same time, and that is human. And I would appreciate it if we looked at our autistic students as students with a diversity of strengths and areas of growth that deserve different educational and teaching methods. If someone sees a student as a person first and then autism second, and never just together and together being a wonderful place to be, a human place to be, then educators will most likely view autism as a problem or as something to overcome. They're a person and they must overcome this second thing. But my autism equips me with unique strengths and challenges. And these strengths and challenges come together to form my life and my perspective and my learning styles.
Yeah, well, and Lauren, Melissa, that's a great segue into the next person I want to ask a question of here, because you're talking about the individual experience for each student and how for you there's this combination of strengths and challenges that show up in lots of areas of everyday life. And that is true for every autistic student, even if they have different challenges or different strengths. And it's an interesting question about how we best serve students who have different needs. And I would particularly love to jump to Gerardo and hear, so you've been working on this issue in Mexico, your home country, and what does it look like for different kinds of autistic learners to have access to inclusive education in Mexico? What are the main challenges, and do you see at all difficulty with the wide range of differences in the needs of autistic students?
We have a lot of challenges, Claire, because I mean, we see on the private sector that a mom or a dad reaching out up to 10 to 12 schools for children to get accepted. We have in higher education, we don't have opportunities actually on many universities. When we look at the public sector, we see that they are not ready. I mean, one of the things that we've been doing is training and giving tools for teachers so they can have different strategies so they can know about autistic students. And I love what Laureen Melissa was saying about autistic students, because we must face the strengths and not only the challenges. No, we have a lot of challenges here in Mexico because I think we are not ready. Many answers that we have from schools, either on the public sector or in the private sector, they say we are not ready as schools. So, but you have to be ready. You have to get ready. You have to be open to the opportunity. I mean, you don't have to label the student. You have to adapt the systems to all of the students, not only neurodivergent students, but for all the students. No.
Well, Gerardo, I appreciate you bringing that piece in, because a lot of times we hear the term special needs to refer to students with autism or other disabilities. And it's a term that's not as popular with self-advocates, because the idea that any human's basic needs to learn or to exist are special comes across as a bit patronizing and can make them seem like a burden. And you bring up this idea here that every student has got their own needs when it comes to the classroom, when it comes to their coexistence in society with others. So we could get philosophical here, but I love what you're saying about the way that you're approaching this issue specifically in Mexico. And I would love to connect it to Archie's experience in the Philippines next. And if you could tell me, do you see any of the same challenges, different ones? And particularly when it comes to primary school, so kindergarten and elementary school, what are you seeing with young students in your country?
Thank you. Well, certainly there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but a very promising development is recently, in March specifically, our president inked a law called the Inclusive Education Act, which basically mandates all private and public schools nationwide to give students of all abilities access to inclusive education. But this came very recently, so expectedly, many schools still find themselves ill-equipped for this. So this inspired me to set up an organization that works with local government units in setting up community-based therapy and education programs. And this entails working very closely with the Department of Education, particularly with the different schools divisions. We believe that one gap that remains unaddressed in terms of our efforts towards building a more inclusive ecosystem, school ecosystem, is the lack of intentional training programs to help neurotypical children to be more inclusive towards their peers. I observed that many of our government's efforts are centered on training the teachers and staff, and rightfully so, as well as providing schools with appropriate facilities, equipment, but majority of the people in a school system are neurotypical students. Sure, many of them might learn from, modeling of their teachers, from intermittent reminders and advice from their parents, but are there really intentional and deliberate programs or curricular enrichments that are institutionalized in schools? This led us to create modules which we call DIMPLES, which stand for Diversity and Inclusion Modules for Preschool to Late Elementary Students. I love the name because we know that dimples, technically speaking, are anatomical anomalies, but yet they're widely considered as beauty marks, aren't they? Well, at least in the Philippines. So we would like to start our children young. We believe that it is during the preschool and elementary stage when the students are actually in their formative years. And that it is at this stage when prejudice can actually be developed. So that is one unique experience that I'd like to share. And the modules that we've developed consist of instructional materials using fun activities like songs, dances, cartoons, storybooks that foster diversity and inclusion. So yeah, and we're very happy to say that we have furnished many public schools with these kits, and we have also piloted the materials in Myanmar, which is a neighboring country here in ASEAN.
So you're not just changing your country, Archie, you're changing the region. Slowly the world is our hope. And something you said there, I think it gave me this thought of neurotypical students make up most of the classroom. Well, that's not just true in the classroom. Neurotypical humans make up most of the world and most of society. And so what does it look like? And you even brought up the intersection of law and, actual human experience. Collectively, as we at the United Nations here today think about what world governments and world citizens do, like on a societal level, what is the intersection between the way that we support each other or the way that we set laws and share policy ideas and the individual experiences of students and families, and ideally their empowerment. So I don't expect anyone here to have the answer to that question, but it really is the one we're here to dig into today. And I think some of what you said, Archie, about encouraging acceptance among peers does make me want to bring into this. And I didn't think I was going here, but my own mother, who after I received my own diagnosis in college, she was a middle school principal. And she said, I've got students just like Claire who are in my schools, and diagnosed or not, they're a little different. And particularly those who are face a lot of stigma if they're diagnosed and they carry that label. I'm from Tennessee in the United States in the South, where it can be a little bit old fashioned in terms of is having the label a good thing or bad. And she created a program where every year during the month of April, not that inclusion doesn't happen year round, but every single teacher in the school during a certain period of the day was going to talk to their middle schoolers about what neurodiversity meant, and not just autism, but the idea of there are people around you who may interact differently and have different strengths and have sensory differences, and it's normal. And it's a key developmental age like preschool, because middle school is a time when a lot of your social understanding is forming. So that's, my mom is Dr. Laura Barnett, and she's a professor at Austin Peay State University. So I want to give her a call out, because I think that's the kind of program that she implemented when she was a middle school principal that could have impact in any context at that key sort of adolescent age. Now, we have talked about the state of education and the current initiatives happening in the US and Mexico and the Philippines. And that really brings me to Diana, because you're working for the Lego Foundation, and y'all are making big moves on the front of inclusive education for autistic and neurodivergent students. And I want to know, what innovation in education do you think is next and needs to be our next iteration, so that autistic students have not just the ability to be present, but to be empowered and to reach their potential?
Yeah, thanks so much, Claire. So at the Lego Foundation, we really see that education solutions and meaningful innovation are currently lacking for autistic children. To date, we believe that education technology, methodologies, and also facilitation methods are mostly adapted to, rather than specifically designed for neurodivergent children. And as such, we see that there is a real need for further investments to help close this gap, but also to provide all children an equal opportunity to develop the skills needed to thrive in the 21st century. So in the Lego Foundation, we believe that innovative, playful learning approaches have an important role here, because play helps children find and hone their strengths, and also build essential skills such as social and communication skills. And play also allows children to learn through a style that is as different and adaptable as children themselves. So some children prefer learning through moving rather than sitting at a desk. And for them, play is ideal to get up, experiment, try, have a hands-on, minds-on experience. Other children, they like the order and calm because maybe the world is already noisy enough. And for them, play can come with rules, and it can also come with routines that everyone can follow. At the foundation, we want to show that education innovation shouldn't be limited to schools, because as we know, learning happens everywhere. I mean, it's at school, at home, in communities. So on April 7th, we announced the Play for All Accelerator program, through which we'll be providing expertise and also equity-free funding for organizations who wish to support neurodivergent children with play-based learning. And we really hope that we will discover, also inspire and scale innovations that can help develop playful learning in all of these settings.
Well, and Diana, your comment about play-based learning and it's not even a comment, it's your whole mission about play-based learning as a way to bring in autistic students, I think is really essential, because the traditional format is to sit, read, write, and listen. And so that format does work for some students on the spectrum, but for a lot it doesn't. And especially those of us who also have a diagnosis of ADHD. I know, I did not struggle in school, but the hardest thing I did was listen through anything. I would teach it to myself later because I needed to interact with the content, right? And that's something play-based learning can do for students around the world because of what the Lego Foundation is doing. So thank you for your work. And it actually, talking about the Lego Foundation brings me back to something I want to bring in Laura and Melissa on, which is, what do you guys feel, and this may be a bit of a conversation, is the role of organizations versus self-advocates to direct where the future of inclusive education goes for students on the autism spectrum? And when I say students, we're particularly talking school age through college, but even like adults continue to be learners. So part of this is about the direction of the advocacy movement as a whole. So where do you guys see the position of people who are autistic speaking up and directing this versus organizations with research and funding?
First off, I would ask those organizations to look at who they're hiring and whether or not there are autistic people on their boards, on their
Love that.
If autistic individuals are delivering the training that we're talking about that educators need. And then that training, which I'm so glad everyone is bringing into this space, is so important, and it needs to be high quality. It needs to include early childhood and secondary, because our young children that are autistic grow into high schoolers that are autistic, and high school teachers need to know how to have an inclusive environment at that age as well. And that training has got to include and center autistic voices, in whatever way. So even if a facilitator of a training is not autistic themselves, are autistic voices embedded in the training? Are they present in those slides? Are voices in that room? Because we really can't be talking about autistic people without autistic people there in some way. And I also want to bring in that training, and this is just something that I have to throw in because I'm really passionate about this. Where is the research coming from in those trainings? Is it old or is it new? Because autism is a rapidly changing field, and some research that came out 15 years ago could be completely invalid today. So really pausing and thinking through that training as we bring in autistic voices, and hopefully autistic voices are actually delivering some of it.
Well, and I want to get Diana's perspective, but I have to add to that, Laura and Melissa, where research is coming from is essential, not only because of, its age, but also because we see research come from a couple of different perspectives in the space of autism. And sometimes it comes from the perspective of, like, is there a way to cure this? Is there a way to make it go away, or to train autistic kids to appear the least autistic? And I understand how parents and scientists arrive at this question of, like, I want my child's life to be easier. But there's that perspective is not always empowering. And so does it come from an organization or a research center like, Vanderbilt's Frist Center for Autism and Innovation, where I was a communications coordinator and now I'm a fellow? Does it come from a place that's particularly looking to empower the neurodivergent experience? And you'll see a lot of that in language too. You're hearing us on this panel say autistic, and that we believe that's an empowering term. Sometimes you'll read a paper and it'll refuse to use the term autistic. It'll just say person or people with autism. And it's never intended to be insulting, but a lot of times that's the older method of education on, oh, well, what's the most respectful way? And we talked about people first. That is an old model of what does it look like to be respectful to all kinds of disabled people. And the truth is that a lot of folks on the spectrum don't see that as best now. So it's something to ask each individual, but to know, if you're an educator, if you're in this space, be aware of what language is actually considered most respectful now, and not just the training you may have received in the past. Now, I'll get off my soapbox. Diana, do you have anything to add to Laura and Melissa's statements about the interaction of organizations and individual self-advocates?
No, I think Laura, Melissa, you have an excellent point in terms of how do we actually ensure that autistic voices are heard and also engaged in whatever work we do. And that's exactly how we've also been working on our new Play for All Accelerator program, because I totally agree that is super important. And we also know that research is part of the solution to help both, of course, raise awareness, but also understanding of innovative pedagogical approaches. So that's also something that we at the foundation is committed to investing in. We're still very early days, I also have to point out. So we're trying to figure out, where do we invest in the best possible ways when it comes to research. But yeah, happy to continue that conversation as well.
Well, and Archie, I would love to get your perspective here too. So, coming from an organizational based setting in the Philippines, what are you seeing?
Well, definitely, I agree that self-advocates really need to be at the forefront in all these undertakings. But in the Philippines, our experiences, many of our initiatives actually take off more successfully when we also involve their parents. So we have very empowered parent organizations, and conversing with many of them, they feel that since many of their children are unable to express themselves, I guess, in a way that most people would understand them, they feel that they are also in a good position to help advocate for their children. In the Philippines, apart from coordinating with self-advocate groups, parent organizations, we also need to do a lot of work building relationships with local governments, because that's where the funding comes from. We, as an organization, taught ourselves how to write proposals for grants. But what we have discovered is relying on funding from foundations, for example, isn't very sustainable, because at one point they'd say they'd like to move on to the next project. So what happens next? So that's why if we partner with LGUs or local government units, and they have passed, say, ordinances to allocate budget for CWA programs, then these programs are guaranteed sustainability, because government doesn't really run out of money. And I'd like to share also, speaking of laws, in the Philippines, we passed the special, well, sorry, it's a long law. It's an old law, so it's still called the Special Education Act, which basically mandates local governments to allocate 1% of real estate property taxes collected by LGUs for programs pertinent to the education of differently abled students. So I guess as advocates, as professionals, we too have to educate ourselves about laws. We can invoke these laws to be able to gather support for programs that we'd like to set up for and with the PWD sector.
Yes, just yes to pretty much all of it. Your comment about bringing in families and parents near the beginning and not bringing power to it. And, you know, I do want to recognize there that this is a really tough conversation when it comes to education, is who gets to speak for students who don't communicate traditionally, right? Because they still have opinions and still have perspectives and experiences and ways of communicating those that may be not as direct as stating them verbally. It might be writing or picture boarding or body language. And so, you know, it's not that someone else speaks on their behalf, but who do we have that we can bring into the picture who can provide support in interpreting that communication into a format that most people are familiar with, so that their voices continue to be heard in the space, right? Because it's easy to look at Lauren, Melissa, or I as self-advocates and say, oh yes, you can give us several sentences on any topic in this advocacy area you'd like. But what are we doing to bring students into the conversation who maybe wouldn't speak on this panel with their own out loud voice, but how are they still as important a part of this conversation? And we could get into adaptive communication. The UN focused on that for World Autism Day a few years ago. There are some really interesting places this could go. But for the sake of time, let's bring it back to education. And I want to jump back here as we get near the end of our conversation to Gerardo, because I've seen you nodding along, and I know with your experience in Mexico and the organization that you're a huge part of, you are seeing something played out in the educational space, not just personally, or not just professionally, but also personally. And I would love to know what you bring to this personally, how that motivates you, and where you see, as someone who is a family member, this, you know, the future of inclusive education going.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I've been nodding a lot because, well, for example, what Archie saying about the NGU's funding in Mexico, we don't have any funding from the government, so it's very hard as an organization. I think we have to build a community, and I think self-advocates and organizations must work together because we have the same goal, you know, for our children, or for our families, or for people in general, no. And I think, and I want to share some thoughts that I've been writing about your question. But I think that the problem is that we see autism as the problem. You know, we see the problem, students with special needs, no, and I quote it because all of us as human beings have special needs. I mean that, and we must understand it, no. And the problem is the education systems as a whole, not the autistic. Not the problem is not the problem. I think we have to shift perspective and change the narrative. I think that we must understand that people on the spectrum is not the responsibility of his teaching aid. We see a lot of that in Mexico, where you have to bring in someone, a teaching aid, a monitor, or whatever it's called in any country, no? And but I think that the responsibility is for the whole school, for the whole community, not only for their monitor or their teaching aid, no? I think that we must understand that regular on education, as we understand it, and I put it in quotes, no, the regular education has a lot to learn from what we think a special education, and I quote it, no, because it focuses on adapting the system so the student develops all his potential, and I think that should be education itself. And I want to share you a brief story that I've been living with my son on his school, that we've been doing a lot of awareness since he's now 12. He's now 12. We've been working with that school for 8 years now. And 3 years ago, before the virtual world, there was an activity with parents, and I was talking to some of his friends that how does Alvaro is doing at school, how does he behaving, no? And one of his friends comes up and says, oh, he gets up and he goes with his canceling headphones, running around the classroom and everything. And I was like, okay, no. And I tell to Sandro, Sandro, do you know that Alvaro is autistic? And he just looks at me and says, and? I mean, we took off the stigma and the label from him, no? And I think that where education has to be going is to accept diversity in all, as a whole, no? Not labeling, not working for special needs, in quotes, children, but accepting diversity as a whole, no? And I think, and that's where I believe and strongly believe that what we believe as special education right now is going to be the future for regular education.
As it should be. I love your statement, Gerardo, about adapting to every student's needs so they meet their potential. That's exactly what education is for. Wow, there are so many things I would love to ask you guys. Sadly, we are reaching the end of our time on this panel. And so y'all promise me we'll get together again one day. We'll continue this over a cup of coffee in somebody's country. We've got 4 represented here. Maybe we'll get together at the UN when we're able to have this event in person again. But as we wrap this up, I would love to know what concluding thought or takeaway or thing that you didn't get to share that you want to very briefly, do you want to put out there? And I'm thinking like 1 to 2 sentences. What is the final thing that you want people to know and to remember from this education panel when it comes to neurodivergent students? And let's start with Laura and Melissa.
First thought is just to go on this thing about autistics will always be autistic. Let's not try to change them. But I want to take a moment actually to speak up for the educators that I work with, the ones who are taking on this work, the ones who give me a lot of hope in each day of my professional work. And I want to advocate for them in this important conversation around innovating education and training and resources. And I just want to say that teachers don't just need training, they need time to actually implement changes to their classrooms and teaching methods that those trainings promote. We've got to give them that time. We've got to give them that space in their busy days, because we can put all the ingredients in the oven, but the meal won't come out right if we bake it for 5 minutes instead of 45 minutes. So we really have to offer that space to teachers too.
What a great metaphor, and a very important point about not just expecting things to change overnight because you threw the right training module at it, right? Let's go next to Archie. What are your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say that what limits children with autism from fully, from optimizing their experiences in schools isn't necessarily their disability, but rather the wrongful attitudes of the people around them. So therefore, interventions shouldn't just be focused on the child, but on systems, on teachers, on facilities, on curricula. And that's, I guess, what inclusive education is about. It's us adapting to the child rather than the other way around.
Absolutely. It brings up the thought that, I'm an MBA student right now. Don't know a lot of autistic MBA students. That's a whole nother panel. But we're working on getting sensory like breakaway pods installed in our building. We haven't talked much about spaces, but even in an education setting, sensory friendly spaces can be a huge building adaptation. So that's a call out from your closing thought, Archie. Thank you. Let's go next to Diana.
Thanks so much. I think as was just mentioned, we still have a very long way to go to fully embrace neurodiversity and break the stigma of diagnosis. And while we think that plays one of the most important ways in which children can actually gain essential knowledge and skills, and actually also have the opportunity to play, to forge meaningful friendships, to build resilience and coping, and also navigate relationships and so on and so forth. So we see that as really, really an important component going forward. And then I think it is really a call out to make sure that we actually come together and speak with one voice. So I totally agree with you, Archie, in terms of how do we navigate, but also how do we activate all of those different players that are out there? How do we come together and how can we raise awareness more as one rather than so many individuals?
And that's the exact purpose of the UN's World Autism Day, is as a collective, how do we share ideas and work together? I love it. Okay. And finally, Gerardo, what are your closing thoughts for us as we leave the panel?
An invite for schools and teachers to be open to outcome, not attached to outcome. No, I think we have to raise awareness. Everyone has to step up, and schools have to eliminate stigma and fear. I mean, I think the fear of the unknown is the first barrier for inclusion. And for us and for me and for autistic children, I think that the first barrier is not to how is he going to participate in the classroom, is what are we going to do for him to achieve and develop his full potential, no? As a person, as everyone should do. No? It has been an honor to participate here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerardo. And thank you to every member of this panel. My closing thought, which no one asks for, but I'm going to offer, is just to educators to not underestimate your autistic students, whether they communicate traditionally or not, male or female, regardless of age, regardless of the race or ethnic group they come from. This student, no matter how different they are, has got a lot of potential and can accomplish really interesting, wonderful things and have a fantastic life, no matter what that looks like. And so as an educator out there, if that's you get to be the start of that journey. So hopefully that's encouraging and a little bit challenging. And I am so grateful to have had the insights of Diana and Lauren, Melissa, and Archie and Gerardo to bring their wisdom to this panel. And I want to thank everybody who's attended it for joining us today.
Hi, my name is Major Dodson. I am 18 years old and I'm an actor. I'm on the spectrum. I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when I was 4 years old. But of course, we don't refer to that anymore because Mr. Asperger was a horrible Nazi. Anyways, getting off topic here. I recently starred in a film called Tyson's Run, where I played the titular character of Tyson, who is 15 years old. He is autistic, and he joins a marathon to earn the approval of his father, who he feels he is disappointed by being who he is, an autistic teenager. In the film, Tyson goes to high school because he feels that he has been left out, that he hasn't had that experience. And in his efforts to kind of integrate into the society of the school, his father is the school's football coach, he undergoes a lot of struggle because he can't really mesh with all the other kids, except for one. No spoilers. But he just has a lot of problems, and that kind of echoes what happened to me growing up in Texas. They're not the most progressive, forward-thinking government in the United States. So for years, it was an uphill battle with my parents, with the school system, to even get me recognized as being on the spectrum. We hired a diagnostician who had referred me to the school board, and she did not say that I could be autistic because I had more than one obsession. I didn't talk like a robot. But while she has these things going on over here, I couldn't hold a conversation for more than 4 seconds with somebody. So two sides of a coin. But anyways, I didn't have the easiest time being supported, and hopefully they've gotten better. But if they haven't, then this is a pressing issue that needs to be addressed. If you don't give the kids the support that they need, there's no way that they can blossom. So.
Hi everyone, my name is Pooja Panesar. I'm one of the founders and directors of Kaizora Therapies and Kaizora Foundation in Kenya and Kaizora Child Development Center in Tanzania. Education of the autistic community in Kenya is hugely lacking in terms of inclusivity. So even when we have children transition from Kaizora to go to mainstream education, we find that they might regress, they might hop from school to school, or they might even be rejected by many schools. So there's a big gap in the education institutions being able to provide inclusivity and equal opportunity. In light of this, here in Kenya, we are trying to start a school that will be fully inclusive and take in these children and hopefully be able to provide the inclusive education and equal opportunity that we envision for every single child in every single school in our community.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Valeur. I'm the Global Chair of the Institute of Neurodiversity. We are headquartered in Switzerland. We launched last year and we're in the process of setting up in 10 other countries. We are by neurodivergent people for neurodivergent people, and our purpose is to make us prosper equally to other people in the world. With regards to education, although we are as a membership organization for adults from 18 and up, we do have a key interest in inclusive education for us. And all of us have had not very nice experiences of school, where we at large were bullied and not able to be taught to the full of our abilities. So we feel there is a different way of looking at education that needs to happen, that is much more inclusive of everybody as opposed to the middle of the ground people. We make it inclusive of everyone, also all neurodivergent kind of people. That's not what is being seen currently, and that really needs to change. COVID did have some impact in a sense in that we were able to be taught from home, which suits a number of neurodivergent children better. It's less overwhelming. Maybe it could be half a day in school and half day teaching at home, but obviously that puts a lot of strain on parents that parents might not be able to meet. So I think it's a very difficult question to answer whether COVID in itself made a difference. What it did do was show us that there is a different way. It is possible that it is better or worse for some, all depending on what their home situation is as well. But a lot of the feedback we've heard from autistic people is that it was easier for them to be at home during COVID. There was less anxiety and less depression in that period. And now when we have to go back, it drives more anxiety. And the reason it does that is the social model of disability that we believe in. It's how people react to us and how we're treated in the environment we are in. So there's still a lot of work to do.
Hi there. My name is Jordana Zimmerman, and for a visual access, I am a white female with brown hair past my shoulders. I am wearing a gray shirt. I'm positioned in front of a busy bookshelf. I communicate by typing letter by letter on an iPad, which then speaks aloud. I currently live in Ohio, though I engage with educators and students in communities across the country. When I think about inclusive educational spaces, I think about all students engaged in learning and playing together, with everyone having the supports they need to experience success, however that's defined by them. While there are schools that are inclusive towards specific populations of students, I have not yet come across an environment where everyone is honored as they come and supported to coexist with one another. I know as a student in K through 12, and even higher education, this was often my observation as well. Though I was mostly segregated throughout my K through 12 experience, I was very much physically included in college. However, in many ways, I didn't synchronize with other students on campus, and my feelings of belonging fluctuated a whole lot. I ultimately earned my master's degree in education, and as a student teacher in my master's program, there was a new sense of exclusionary practice and ableism that had not been as present before. We have a lot of work to do until all students feel welcome.
I'm Dr. Mapi Chavez-Askins, founding director of Alcanzando, a public charity seeking to bring greater awareness of autism through research-based direct services to Spanish-speaking families globally. I believe that inclusive education is the key to having each child with autism reach their full potential. Early detection and intervention with every child placed in an educational inclusive setting by the age of 5 is our goal. In Latin America, a significant number of children are not receiving services due to geographic and economic reasons. Those receiving services are in programs with low empirical support. As a recognized expert in autism, it is clear to me that a compelling need exists for educational and health systems to increase availability of services. We have low rates of identification and diagnosis, the result of stigma, lack of awareness, and education. Low access and use of services based on geographical location and socioeconomic status compound the issue. In 2013, while collaborating in what will become the law for the protection of individuals with autism in Peru, I witnessed important gains made in awareness and understanding of autism, but the need for up-to-date knowledge was clear. We know early inclusion is key for long-term success. COVID-19 forced us to refocus on the importance of the home, parents and willing relatives as the best combination for skill acquisition and inclusion. This work will allow children to flourish and become productive members in our communities, and those communities will have the tools and knowledge to understand that we all belong in an inclusive world. These 2 years have taught us that there are more families in need than we had previously imagined. Alcanzando's response was the now optimized telehealth parent-mediated program as our most effective tool, allowing us to reach families irrespective of geographical distances at reduced costs to all. This is Alcanzando's best first step toward inclusion, earlier and more effectively than possible in the past.
Perkenalkan, nama saya Doni, saya ayah dari Anfil Wibowo. Anfil Wibowo adalah seorang anak remaja, sekarang dia berusia 17 tahun. Dia memiliki 2 kekhususan, yaitu tuli dan sindrom Asperger atau bisa dikatakan dia autis. Anfil bersekolah di SLBB, yaitu sekolah khusus untuk tuli. Berbicara mengenai masa pandemi tahun 2020 ya, sangat sulit bagi dia menerima keadaan itu. Jelas dan pastinya adalah aktivitas dia keseharian di rumah berubah. Biasanya sekolah, kali ini tidak sekolah. Sekolah memang tidak bisa pakai Zoom ya, karena biasanya mereka bertatap muka, kali ini harus pakai komputer. Dan juga kemampuan masing-masing siswa juga berbeda-beda. Dan kemampuan guru untuk mengatasi itu juga mungkin juga belum terlalu siap. Jadi selama beberapa bulan memang tidak ada Zoom, Anfil hanya dikasih tugas saja.
Children with neurodiversity are generally neglected, even among children with disabilities in Indonesia. During the COVID pandemic, these children are affected due to the lack of supporting learning devices and parental support, while the state system was not ready. Therefore, we need more concerted effort to seriously attend to the basic needs of these children.
Hola, mi nombre es Mafer. I am the director of Centro Enigma in Ecuador. We have sites in rural and urban places. 6 years ago, we started doing early intervention. Now we do early intervention, and we have noticed a big gap on children that are not being able to be accepted into a school system. So this last year, we decided to do a homeschooling modality for all those children that either because of their lack of language or maladaptive behavior are not being included in a school system. So we have, through the homeschooling modality, we're in charge of educating children with autism here in Ecuador, ages that are in the elementary stage.
Hi, my name is Torkel Sonne. I'm the founder of Specialist and a Foundation. At last year's event, autistic panelists called for structural changes in the labor market and education system. In this year's message, the Secretary General calls for community-based solutions to leave no one behind, and mentions in particular the need for inclusive education and training programs. Today, I'll share with you some community-based solutions in Aalborg and our partnership with the North Denmark Chambers of Commerce, who is represented today by the chairman Rasmus Haugaard. In Aalborg, Denmark, we have been educating volunteers as inclusion agents from a variety of companies and industries appointed by the Chambers of Commerce about the fundamentals of inclusion of neurodivergent persons. The volunteers share know-how with their colleagues and co-create inclusive environments in their companies. With this initiative, we bring civil society into inclusion efforts. Inclusion must start as early as possible. Therefore, we are also working on a project enabling inclusive learning environments in mainstream schools. Aalborg University is our academic partner to share knowledge and document impact. And now I'll ask Rasmus Haugaard to share his perspectives on inclusive education and employment.
Hi, my name is Rasmus Haugaard and I'm the chairman of the North Denmark Chamber of Commerce. We are the largest organization of our kind in this part of Denmark, representing small, medium-sized and also large multinational companies. We've chosen to become a part of this project because we think that it has the potential, the capacity to provide small and medium-sized companies with the knowledge to bridge the gap between the demand for workers and the untapped talent of neurodivergent persons. Inclusion of neurodivergent persons is by many considered impossible or as part of the company CSR. I believe that this project will prove that the opposite is reality, that a neurodivergent person can be a full and successful colleague. When we accomplish that, we will do good for a vast number of talented, resourceful neurodivergent persons, and in the same instance provide solutions for the peaking demand for workers by allowing small, medium-sized companies in all industries to take part in the education of themselves and the neurodivergent person to become part of the future labor market.
We hope that you have found inspiration in the Aalborg initiative in how a community can come together to enable inclusion at scale. Thank you.
My name is Shravani Roy. I had been completed in graduation in Bachelor of Commerce. I had done in diploma in 2D animation course. I want to pursue in dream of fashion designing. I am working as a volunteer in Zoram.
ನನ್ನ ಹೆಸರು ಕವಿತಾ ಮಂಜುನಾಥ್ ಅಂತ. ನಾನು ಆಶಾ ಬ್ಯಾಂಗ್ಳೂರ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಪೆಷಲ್ ಎಜುಕೇಟರ್ ಆಗಿ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಸ್ಪೆಷಲ್ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಡ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಫಸ್ಟು ಇರಬೇಕಾಗಿರೋ ಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಪೇಷನ್ಸ್ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಈ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಟ್ಟಾಗ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಕಲಿತಾರೆ ಮತ್ತು ಬೇಗನೂ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ರೀಡಿಂಗು ರೈಟಿಂಗು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾಡಿ 5th ಗ್ರೇಡು 3rd ಗ್ರೇಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಮ್ಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬರೆದು ಪಾಸ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಆರ್ಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಕ್ರಾಫ್ಟ್ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಡ್ಯಾನ್ಸ್ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಮ್ಯೂಸಿಕ್ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಯೋಗ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಮತ್ತು ಸ್ಪೋರ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಆರ್ಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಕ್ರಾಫ್ಟು ಬೇರೆ ಕಡೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಪಾರ್ಟಿಸಿಪೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಪ್ರೈಸಸ್ ಗೆದ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಡ್ಯಾನ್ಸು ಮ್ಯೂಸಿಕ್ಕಿಂದನೂ ಪ್ರೈಸಸ್ ಗೆದ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಈ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಕಂಪ್ಯೂಟರ್ ಸ್ಕಿಲ್ಸು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಕಂಪ್ಯೂಟ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬ ಆ್ಯಕ್ಟಿವಿಟೀಸ್ಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಕಲಿತು ತುಂಬ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಈ ಡೇಟಾ ಎಂಟ್ರಿ ಅಂಥದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವೇರ್ನೆಸ್ ತುಂಬ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಬೇಗ ನಾವು ಮಕ್ಕಳನ್ನ ಗುರುತಿಸಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಇಂಟರ್ವೆನ್ಷನ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಇದು ಮಾಡೋದು ಸ್ಲೋ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಅದೇ ಅವೇರ್ನೆಸ್ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಬೇಗ ಗುರುತಿಸಿ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಟ್ರೈನ್ ಅಪ್ ಮಾಡಿ ನಾರ್ಮಲ್ ಸ್ಕೂಲ್ ಕಳಿಸೋ ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆಗಳು ತುಂಬ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇದ್ದಾವೆ. ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಓದಿ ದೊಡ್ಡವರಾಗಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ವೊಕೇಶ್ನಲ್ ಸೆಂಟರ್ಸು ನಮ್ಮ ಏರಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ತುಂಬ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬರ್ಡನ್ ಪೇರೆಂಟ್ ಮೇಲೇ ಬೀಳ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಸೊ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ತುಂಬ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಬೇಕು. ತುಂಬ ಸೆಂಟರ್ಸ್ ಓಪನ್ ಆದರೆ ಪೇರೆಂಟ್ಸ್ಗೂ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕಷ್ಟ ಕಮ್ಮಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಕೇಳ್ಕೊತೀನಿ.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as highlighted in this commemoration of the World Autism Awareness Day, inclusive quality education provides an unprecedented opportunity to advance the inclusion of persons with autism in all spheres of society. On behalf of DESA, co-organizer of the World Autism Awareness Day, I express my appreciation to the contributions from all participants to today's event. One key message from the discussion today is that the access to inclusive quality education is critical to the realization of the rights of persons with autism in alignment with the goals and objectives of the 2030 Development Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals. This is also consistent with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which emphasizes the importance of inclusive education, calling for the states parties to ensure access to inclusive, quality, and free education, and to provide reasonable accommodations in schools. Since 2019, the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy has been advancing the disability inclusion in the global agenda, including through the UN own work in promoting inclusive, quality education for persons with autism in line with the Convention and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development just mentioned. Despite such progress, persons with autism still face many challenges. There is a lot of persisting isolation and discrimination, which negatively impacts on education and ultimately on employment and income, as well as their overall well-being, frustrating the efforts of the community and loved ones. The COVID-19 pandemic created additional challenges and has adversely affected the lives of those with autism, including in their education. The services they need and can get at school have often been interrupted and in some cases discontinued, creating a vacuum in the education. Numerous barriers to access to education still remain. These include discriminatory laws, lack of accessibility in schools, lack of teaching methods inclusive of all, unaffordable cost of education, and lack of awareness among teachers and school staff of the potential of inclusive education. The international community and its stakeholders must therefore galvanize their forces to dismantle persistent barriers in education. Enabling the access to quality education would require the participation of many different stakeholders, including governments and civil society, and in particular, persons with disabilities and their representative organizations. The Department of Economic and Social Affairs also stands ready to work with you to achieve the goal of quality education for all, including those with autism. Today's commemoration has raised the awareness about the need for and the importance of quality education for those with autism as an essential condition for creating an inclusive, accessible, and sustainable world. Let us take action to achieve this goal. I thank you for your attention.